Welcome to the Science of Parenting podcast, where we connect you with research based information that fits your family. We'll talk about the realities of being a parent and how research can help guide our parenting decisions. I'm Mackenzie Johnson, parent of two littles with their own quirks, and I'm a parenting educator.
And I'm Lindy Buckingham Shutt, a professor of human nutrition, guest co host, and a mom to one sweet angel baby and one young insatiable eater.
We love it. So we are excited. Still having here talking all about Lindy, or well, we could talk all about you if you want, but we're talking all about food mostly.
That's what I want to talk about. So,
Yeah, you're like I'd prefer that actually. Okay, we'll stick with food as the topic, but talking all about it this season, season 10 here, feeding our kids and all this stuff. And now, I mean, last week we were talking about practices. Before that, we talked about styles and the influences, and but last week we learned about some of those practices like providing structure, supporting our kids' autonomy, and then the less helpful strategy of coercive control. What about this week?
this week, very excited. We are going to talk about temperament and food and how they mix, stir, scramble together.
Yep. All I could really go on. I was like, they could fold together. They could
Oh,
KitchenAid mixer
oh,
together.
oh, yes, yes.
Stand mixer together.
Grill. I mean, is that
Yeah,
a thing?
maybe
Could they grill?
that. I mean, saute, whatever it is. But lots of good food puns because temperament and food definitely overlap in our parenting. So we're really excited. And this is nice for me because I'm like, yeah, temperament. Okay, whew, I can contribute. I know some stuff.
Yes, but I do want to provide a disclaimer. Temperament is new to me, so I'm not as familiar with it. I am more familiar after I binged season 3 of Temperament of the Science of Parenting podcast, and I loved it. Obviously,
Well, good. Thanks. So yeah, a little shift in our dynamic this week. You're still gonna know. You know a lot. Lindy always knows a lot, guys. Don't worry.
oh, you're too
uh,
nice.
oh well. So we're gonna start off with a few definitions. You know that I like one, but we're gonna go with a few to see how these mix together. So temperament. If you have been a listener for a long time, you maybe heard us talk all about it for 15 episodes in season 3. Can't stop, won't stop. We also talked about it in season 7, where we talked about temperament and child development. But for today, in case this is your first time hearing us talk about it, let's talk about what temperament is. According to Mary Rothbart and colleagues, they define temperament as the physiological basis for individual differences in things like reactivity, self-regulation. This could include motivation, affect, activity, and attention characteristics. In other words, temperament is kind of our general predisposition to how we react and interact with the world. It's a pattern of behavior over time. It's important to remember that it's inborn, right? So even babies in the hospital have a temperament. We're born with temperament. It is genetic, it's passed down to us and is with us from the very beginning of life. You can get more information all about it in depth, like I said, in season 3. But we know that for today, our understanding is that temperament is kind of at the foundation of who we are from the start. And then we get all these other layers of our environment and our personality and our family to build our unique self. But temperament is at the foundation from the beginning, it doesn't change.
Yes, and now we're going to add another layer onto that and talk about adding in what we talked about in the last episode. So, if you remember, hopefully you listened to it and you didn't skip over
Hopefully.
it. Otherwise, there's going to be a lot of information for you here today. But according to Vaughn and colleagues, food parenting practices are defined as the intentional, so goal oriented, or unintentional behaviors and
Hmm.
actions performed by a parent that influences their child's behaviors and actions. And the week before that, we talked about feeding styles, which are the broad approach that parents take to feed children and the emotional climate in which feeding occurs. So,
Yes.
food parenting practices are those behaviors,
Hmm.
actions. Feeding styles are more of your attitudes and beliefs about how we feed your kid.
Yes. So those are all the things we're talking about, right? Style, general belief. I like that. That style is like your belief and attitude. Practices are those behaviors and actions. And then there's temperament. We're tossing that in this mix, fold, scramble, omelet. So as you think about that, from your perspective, how do these fit together? Like, where do they overlap? As you think about temperament and food, yeah, and yeah, being a little bit newer to temperament, how do you see the pieces fit together?
Well, we're going to go back to the first episode where we talked all about what influences what kids eat and the model
Mhm.
that it was in. So we can
Yes.
start to put temperament, which is really at the individual, so that first level, inner level, individual level, together with our feeding styles and practices, which is on the level outside of that, the at the family influence level.
Yeah, so those nesting dolls, like we talked about, like the
Mhm.
concentric circles, but they like build on each other. That temperament is in the individual, and then the next layer, or the next nesting doll out was the family, and that like it's gonna go kind of back and forth in there.
Yeah, yep. So they have a bi-directional effect from the different levels. So it's affecting how we eat
Bidirectional.
in multiple ways, right? So if we think about it, your kiddo's temperament will obviously affect their eating behavior directly. So
Yes.
for example, how your child eats could be based on their temperament and how they respond to different types of parenting and styles and parenting
Hmm.
practice or food parenting practices is going to be dependent on their temperament. But that we can also
Yes.
think about how so that's the kind of obviously family level going into the like arrow into the
Yes.
individual level, right? But then we can also think about it indirectly. So your child's
Okay.
temperament, so that an individual level going back and influencing how you as a parent um, do your food parenting practices or
Mm.
your feeding styles.
Yes. Okay. So you said this earlier when we were putting the episode together. It's like the child is pointing their finger at the parent, right? Like
Oh
it
yeah.
influences them, and the parent is pointing the finger back at the child.
Oh yes.
It
Yep.
goes
Yes.
both directions with temperament and food. And I like that. Like it's direct. Temperament influences what kids eat, and it influences what we choose to do as like our food parenting practices. That temperament is influencing us. And you might remember us talking about that, like our kids' temperament influences us as parents too in previous episodes and previous seasons. It's here too, right?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yep, yep. Just like
Yes.
I'm sure the research with temperament shows, the research around feeding shows that parents of infants with a more difficult temperament are more likely to
Mm,
use food to calm their child. That's just one example. So it's
yes.
really important for you to understand your child's temperament so that you then can in turn observe how it affects your feeding style and your feeding practices.
Yes, and I even think this makes so much sense even, like, between siblings, or, like, why I do something one way and why, like, a friend, or even, like, why my sister does something different with her kids, because our individual child's temperament is influencing us in those practices, and so we adapt. Yeah,
Yes.
and I think like, okay, why was I this way with one and this way with another? Temperament. Temperament is
Temperament.
here.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yes. And it was really interesting. So, yeah, Lindy, I mean, being with it, sent me some articles that she had found in some like food and one of them was called Appetite. There's a
Oh,
journal called
yes. Hmm.
Appetite. Fascinating. But so she sent me some journal articles kind of from her world, but that talked about temperament. And some of them were like, oh, yeah, of course. But there was one thing, and we're going to talk about some of those studies as we go through the traits. But one thing that really jumped out at me and was this idea of our child's temperament impacts the effectiveness of the practices we use, right? So like I am using this strategy. I mean, right, we talked about like restriction, not such a helpful strategy, or I am really trying to engage my child in preparing food with me, right? That's another strategy. The effect, like how well that works is impacted by my child's temperament. And that just
Yeah.
like blew my mind. I don't know why. It shouldn't, but I was just like, "Yeah, yeah, that doesn't work for me, or this is less effective with my child, but it works super well for your child." And it's like, "Yeah, temperament."
Very reassuring as a parent, right? Like, of
Right.
course, this is different for my kid, but yeah,
Yeah.
so some of those studies that, you mentioned,
Mhm.
Holly Haycraft and Farrow, some researchers found that certain strategies like involvement in food preparation, food choice, they were not as effective when a child has a temperament traits of lower sociability or high emotional intensity, which makes sense. If a kid isn't sociable,
Yes.
they might not want to be part of that food preparation, part of that more social activity or choosing
Yes.
things like that.
Yeah, that like introversion versus extroversion. idea of like, yeah, a more introverted child is not like well motivated by that necessarily that time together doing that thing. That makes sense.
Mhm.
Another one in 2010, a study by Haycraft and colleagues found that a child's emotionality was correlated with less enjoyment in their food, with fussier eating, with more emotional over or under eating. And so that temperament playing a role in what they do. But yeah, as I think about as a parent, if I have a child who is more of a fussy eater, the strategies I might choose might be different than if I have a child that's a really adventurous, easygoing eater, right? And so we see how that temperament can influence what strategies we use and whether or not those strategies are effective, right?
Oh,
Okay, and
yes.
one more, right? We have one more here that I like.
One more. Rollins and colleagues in 2013 found that children who are high approach and lower in inhibition have even more negative outcomes from parenting practices around food restriction.
Mm. Yes. And so that's like the worst. I don't want to say worst case scenario. That sounds really bad. But they get like the worst outcomes of, right, food restriction that it's basically the study was finding that they were more likely to kind of have like more disordered eating styles, right? Was part
Yeah,
of
they were
it.
just if it so in the feeding style they did with, I believe, preschoolers, they
Mhm.
restricted snacks from all the kids, but they found the kids who had high approach when that snack was reintroduced were more likely than to overeat or
Like
overindulge in
really
that
go
food.
for it because
Mhm,
like, "Oh my
really go
gosh, I
for
never get to have this. I'm not allowed to
it.
have this."
Exactly,
That
yeah.
makes
Mhm.
sense. And so that temperament, yeah, I just thought that was really fascinating and it just really reaffirmed, yeah, the effectiveness of our strategies. Like, okay, yeah, you give this advice, like Lori talks about with temperament. If I wrote this book and I told you these things, a lot of you would think I was a genius. And then you would have some children who don't fit the prototype because of their temperament. And so I think of that like, yeah, this strategy and that strategy and these like preparing food together. Well, if I have a child who isn't motivated by that social aspect, uh, that's not a very effective strategy for them. And so I just think this is really reaffirming the whole idea of more than one way to raise great kids.
Oh,
We can
yes.
both be practicing an authoritative like feeding style and parenting style and be using different like practices.
Yeah.
More than one way.
Yes, and I think to give yourself some grace if your best friend's child is responding to food in a very different way than your
Mm.
child's responding to food. You're not doing anything wrong. I mean, you might be doing something
Yeah.
wrong,
But that's not the
but
only that's not the only thing, right? There's
yeah, but it's
another
not because you're doing
option.
something different from your
Yes.
the other parent.
Mhm. Yeah, affirming that, like, your knowledge of your child, right, can guide the specific things you do and whether or not they align with the person next to you or the person across the street or
Mhm.
whoever else.
Yes.
So, we are gonna dive in to some of the traits, which I'm always all about. I love to talk about the traits. So again, we're just kind of highlighting a few of those 9 traits we tend to use. Thomas and Chess's kind of original 9, if you will. The research kind of morphs them together. The way they're studied can look a little different. But we're going to talk at kind of broad strokes about some, including sensitivity, approach, withdrawal, intensity, and rhythmicity. So again, I'm going to give you like the one liner of what it is, but there's like a whole episode back in season 3. There's like one on sensitivity, one on intensity, one on rhythmicity. So you can go learn all about those. But really, which ones impact food? And, Barb does such a good job reminding us to say that temperament is a gift and there it comes from, right, they're born with it, it's genetic. So if, right, so like I have one child who is irregular like me and one child who is regular like my co-parent, right, it's inborn genetic. And it is a gift. It's going to come with some things that are real assets and some things that feel a little more like liabilities or
Mm,
challenges. And so even when it comes to eating, we're going to remember that they are gifted this temperament and they're
yes.
not changing it.
No. No,
Uh,
nor should they have to, but we can adapt to them,
no,
if
we sure
unless we are
can.
low adaptability, and then I
Yeah,
don't know.
then we will not. Okay, so we're gonna start with sensitivity. This one, I feel like I like continually am learning so much more about sensitivity. Essentially, sensitivity is about how our brain and our body, how sensitive we are to our senses, and it could even be certain senses, right? So we could be highly sensitive to taste, highly sensitive to like sound, like touch, I mean, I could list all 5, right? But whether we are highly sensitive to it, like we're noticing, it really impacts our senses, or low sensitivity, which is where I tend to fall on that spectrum, not so in tune with those things. Those things aren't always on my radar. Um, and so, yeah, that's the trait of sensitivity. That's what it is. So, Lindy, in your thoughts, how do you see this play out with kids and food?
Oh, well, I mean, there's the obvious thing you said. Food has so much to do with all of our senses, right? Taste,
Mm,
smell, touch, even
yes.
sound to a degree.
Mm.
So it influences everything about our interactions with food.
Yeah, well, and I even think, yeah, that idea of touch in food. My my partner, my husband, is like much more highly sensitive to like texture and taste. And yeah, I'm on the like, what? I guess I didn't notice, huh? I
Mhm.
even remember like on when we were like pretty early in our relationship, him saying like, "Oh, that was a really good bite." And I was like, "What do you mean that bite was a good bite?" Like, this is the general food experience. I don't know. But he's very in tune. His senses are really sensitized to pick up on that stuff. And that means for him, one of the things for him is like food texture. It's like
Mhm.
doesn't like mushy, so like avocado. So I mean, really he's missing out, but that's not
Mhm.
my
Oh,
thing to
yes.
judge, I guess. But avocado is mushy and he's very sensitive to that. Or like mushrooms are in kind of the slimy category. And it's literally a difference in our body and brain and how it reacts to it. It's not a he's difficult and I'm easygoing. Our brain and our bodies are literally having a different experience in how it works. So yeah, that doesn't really bother me, but I'm low sensitivity in those areas.
Mhm.
So what does the literature tell us about this kind of sensitivity and how we can respond when our children are kind of either high or low sensitivity?
Well, in general, a very positive food parenting practice is to offer different sensory exposure to our kids to
Mm,
help get them to try new foods and eat different foods. Um, so, if your kiddo has a hard time with different sensitivities, if
mm.
they have a hard time when you introduce new food, you could just try doing things in a different way first, right? So, research has found that visual exposure to unfamiliar vegetables, like using picture books, increases familiarity, willingness to try, and vegetable
Oh,
intake in preschoolers. So, I think this is,
okay.
an opportunity to maybe just okay, let's look at this first before we introduce it, and so maybe you won't be as weirded out. But again, that's very general to any sensitivity. So I
Yes.
think that maybe even better strategy would be to uh, going back to that nutrition education, that nutrition knowledge. How do
Mm,
we improve that? Not even within our kids, but hopefully this
mm.
isn't overwhelming for parents. But improving your own nutrition knowledge and ways specifically to prepare different foods for your kids. So like your husband just like avocado, maybe we could put avocado in the blender with some other things, and it
Yes.
could just be a different way of tasting avocado, or
Mhm.
covering it with some chopped up nuts or something, so it's not quite that same texture.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, maybe they're not going to like that food, but you're trying.
Mhm. Yes, and I think that exposure, right? Like, we talk
Hmm.
about that repeated exposure to food, and you're gonna talk more about that, I know. But I even think about mushrooms, like, the difference in, like, a sautéed mushroom versus, like, a grilled mushroom versus like last night I had like a can of mushrooms, right? And I just like sauteed it a little bit versus a fresh mushroom. Those are all very different things. And yeah, that we can use different versions of things to reintroduce. Yeah, for me, it's as a low sensitivity in general parent, I have to kind of validate and accept when my child, both, well, one in particular, being a higher sensitivity, that you're not just being difficult, right? It's like the debate about can you taste the onions in the thing? Why do you put the
Hmm.
onions, right? Like, well, you can't taste the onions in the mix of this. Why do you put the onions in there? Flavor. See? Like, right? That's like that
Hmm.
argument back and forth. And so for me, it's also about like accepting this is real for you. Even though it's not my experience, that's real for you. Um, and so that's kind of a temperament strategy, but it does tie into that. How do we give them exposure? How do we offer that sensory exposure? And the idea of books on food, that works with preschoolers. Good to
Yeah.
know.
Hmm. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, and maybe just
Awesome.
changing. I think it's so important, like you said, just exploring and asking questions like, "Well, do you like food this way or do you like food that way?"
Mhm.
Um, like again, I know for my mom, she will not eat mushrooms if they're raw, but if they are
Yeah.
cooked, she will tolerate them.
Yes, right? And so it's different for different things. Okay, so our next trait is approach withdrawal. I love this one. I love them all. I like this one though. So this one, our approach withdrawal level is really related to how we naturally respond to novelty or to something being new or for something for the first time. So a lot of times we talk about it in the context of like, okay, the first time we go somewhere new, the first time you meet somebody, things like that. How does your child or how do you tend to respond? Lori tells that story about like all of them, her and her daughters all like bumping into each other as they go to walk in the
Mhm.
door because they all try to like let the other ones go first because they're low approach. Versus I like swing the door open and run in. Right, that's my high approach. But when we think about it with food, that are as a high approach person that we might be more adventurous, right? The novelty, the newness is exciting or can be invigorating. Some people might call someone with high approach like quick to jump in.
Mhm.
And then low approach being less likely to want to try those foods and might fall into that category of picky.
Yes, picky. I also wonder if high approach folks are more likely to get food poisoning because they're just willing to eat anything.
Oh, okay, that's interesting because at our house, my husband is the one who's like, this is fine, but he's low approach. And
Mm.
I'm high approach, and usually I'm like, that's iffy. Maybe that's the extension person. Maybe I'm the extension. Like I'm the exception because I think I can like hear our food and health colleagues being like, food safety, 4-day
Mhm,
throwaway.
mhm.
Okay, so
Yes.
approach withdrawal. Let's talk about how this one plays out with kids and food.
Yes. So high approach, the research has shown those folks are more likely to enjoy food and be less fussy. So that's great as a parent, right?
Hmm.
You don't want your kids to be fussy. So those high approach
Hmm.
kids, you're gonna have a little bit more luck with them maybe experimenting or trying those new foods.
Yes.
But then on the other hand, there's also those high approach kids are also more likely to be overeaters or have
Mm,
a really negative response to restriction. So,
yes.
some strategies for those high approach kids would really be creating a structure, but not restrict our food environment.
Mm, yes. So like structure and like that can be like the routines, right? How we offer things and that they can come to expect that. That makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I think of the like, yeah, I'm high approach. Like we're ready to go. Like, I don't know. What? Like what do you mean you're not sure? The weirdest thing on the menu is often what I
Mm,
prefer. Like, what's gonna have a variety of flavors? And my husband's like, can I get bland, please?
mhm. Yes.
So yeah, so I think that it's interesting to think about our high approach kids. And I'd never thought about it relating to how much we might eat. Like not just
Mhm.
whether or not we will eat something new, but also high approach. Yeah, that swing the door open and run in can relate to food and not taking maybe that time to slow down and listen to your body. That makes sense. So what about
Yeah.
when someone's low approach or when like more withdrawing?
So, withdrawing, sorry, if your kid is withdrawing, unfortunately, I'm about to tell you they're more likely to be a picky eater.
That
But
tracks for me. That tracks for
yeah.
my children.
That's good to hear. The science plays out right in your household. So it's really important to be responsive to this kiddo, and again, offer those repeated exposures.
Mhm.
We talked about this last time. The science shows that it can take up to 15 times or more. It's not as exact here, but it can
Like,
take
"Okay, I
15 or
met
more.
15 check marks of offering this food. Done."
No, keep going. I mean, to your
Uh,
tolerance, but it can
mhm,
take, up to 15 food introductions before your kid
mhm.
will try the new food.
Yeah.
So this kid might, thrive in those flavor to flavor learning. So pairing
Mm,
something they already really like with that food. And then they could also thrive in what we call flavor nutrient learning. So this is
okay.
teaching them that how, oh, this food makes them feel, like this food makes me feel full, or this
Mm,
food is good for my heart, or will help me run faster.
yes.
Those kind of um,
Like
flavor nutrient learnings might be good for these
yeah,
kids.
like the benefits of some of that. That
Hmm.
makes sense. Well, and I think, yeah, about like I said, with my own kids, yeah, the interesting dip combination that I'm like, I wouldn't have chosen that. Right? But it's a familiar dip in a way that they like with a food they maybe weren't so interested in. And yeah,
Mm,
my daughter in particular, we pasta is a big deal in our house. We like tend to eat, I mean, we have like three kinds that we eat most often, different sauces, whether it's from a box or whatever. I like tortellini. That's like,
mhm.
oh, I'm in an indulgence. Tortellini, so yummy. My daughter hates it. She always asks me if I say we're
That is
making
so
pasta,
surprising. Yeah.
right? Like, she's like, "Your pasta or my pasta?" Because she likes bow tie noodles, right? And so that idea of, I'm like, yeah, mentally, have we had it 15 times? Has she? Like, are we there? Have I hit that? I got to keep going. I'm gonna keep going because I like it,
Mhm.
right? Division of
Yeah.
responsibility. I am serving tortellini.
Mhm.
um, but yeah, that is the selective, the I'm not so interested in this unfamiliar. And I even think like the one bite rule, right? So some families are, our clean plate club or whatever, for a one bite rule for a high approach child is like, yeah, that worked great with my son. And then my low approach child is like, nah, mm-mm, ain't happening, right?
Oh, yes. Yep.
So that's their temperament.
That is
That's
their
their temperament.
temperament. So don't let it affect you and,
Mm.
you know, change the way
Mhm.
you're going to feed them.
Yes, yes. Okay, so that is approach withdrawal. Got a few strategies in there. Now we're going to talk about regularity, also known as rhythmicity. So this essentially has to do with how much of a, I like to say, how much of a clock your body is. Does your body tend to operate on the same patterns of time, whether that's when you're hungry, when you go to the bathroom, all those kinds of things. So some people do. I'm like, yeah, there are people out there. I don't know who they are. Well, I do. They're just not me. Um, People that, right, hungry at the same time every day, and some people who aren't. I am in the people who aren't. I am in the irregular or less rhythm group, as is my daughter. And so sometimes that means, I mean, it can be an asset in that, like, oh yeah, we can flex, we're not super hungry, we'll eat a little later, we'll spend more time here at the park or wherever. But it also can mean that sometimes one of us might be hungry at an inconvenient time. Right? So
Yes.
that's kind of the liability of irregularity. But then my son, when he came along, so with my daughter, yeah, even when she was like pretty young, we could kind of like go do and we'll just see. I don't know. Might work out fine. With my son, it's like, no, he is hungry at this
Mhm.
time. I literally, he could cry and I would know what time. Like when he was an infant, like on maternity leave, or even, after I was back at work, he would cry at like 3 hours almost to the dot, like within 10 minutes. It blew my mind. He is so regular. And then once he started eating more like solid food, I knew we needed to be having supper by like 5:30. Like
Mhm.
we were not gonna make it to 6:30. Like there was none, that flexibility kind of went out the window on, he was very routine. And so a schedule helped him eat. With my daughter, we had routines, but they weren't on a clock. And yeah, my husband falls in the routine category. So he's not mad that we're now in the 5:30 to 6 eating time category every day.
Yes. Yeah. And I think you point out something, it makes it really hard because if you have different
Hmm.
styles within your own family, in general, that makes it really difficult. But then
Hmm.
having a non-routine in a very food that is a socially routine thing makes it really
Yes.
tricky, right?
Hmm.
Like, how do you handle those kids?
Hmm.
So that is really difficult.
Yeah. And so we think about irregular, and so yeah, I always like to remind people a routine is like a pattern. It's not necessarily related to the clock, right? It's like a pattern of how we do things. Like first we set the table, then we this, then we this, versus the schedule. So knowing that those are two different tools, like what would you say about feeding an irregular child?
Yes, feeding an irregular child. Well, yeah, I mean, I think you said it best. Like, just because your child isn't routine doesn't mean they can't create their own feeding routine or things like that. So that
Hmm.
may mean you have prioritized having them help you with meal planning, or you can
Hmm.
always model positive eating behavior, even if it isn't at the table at the same time that
Yes.
everyone else is eating all the time or things like that.
Well, and I even think with my highly irregular son means we eat in this, not always. In general, we tend to eat in that time frame of like 5:30 to 6 cuz he starts to fall apart.
Mhm.
And I mean, he's not an infant anymore, but still starts to fall apart.
Oh, yeah, my
Um
adult husband falls apart
yeah.
without the routine. Mhm.
And then But my daughter, some days she's ravenous by 5:30, and some days she eats exactly 0 bites of supper at the table when we offer it. So one strategy we have for her is we are now at the point, like, if she chooses not to eat or she only eats a little or whatever, it's not like we're not gonna fight about it, right? The division of responsibility, but she sets her plate on the counter. So if she's hungry in 30 minutes, like that's when it strikes. Okay, there's still supper, right? Like I'm still choosing what's offered. Supper is what's offered.
Mhm.
I'm not feeling picky about the time constraint. That's how I've adapted to that irregularity. And so yeah, it's like okay, we could heat it up, we can put it in the fridge, we can like we're willing to kind of redo to some extent. But that this is what's offered and you just don't have to eat it on this exact timetable.
Yeah, yes. So yeah, what you're doing is what I would suggest to other parents who have a highly regular child is, you know, maybe creating that food environment that helps support when they want to eat um, the food that you want them to eat, right? So
Mhm.
having the food is readily accessible, it's available, it is there on the counter so that they get to eat when they choose to eat to a degree. I mean, you want some structure in there, but you're providing
Yes.
structure by creating a healthy food environment.
Mhm. Well,
And then I
and
would
I even oh, go ahead.
oh, no, go ahead.
Okay, well, I was gonna say even on, like, weekends, yeah, I'm so irregular that it's like, "Oh, lunch, huh?" That not always. The hence the irregularity. It depends. But that even on the weekends that, yeah, we might not eat consistently at the same time. Our routine is that, like, my children know we will be offered breakfast, we will be offered lunch, we will be offered a snack, we will be offered supper. And yeah, this weekend it was, like, our snack was, like, ice cream at 4 o'clock and supper at, like, 6:30. Right? We had to kinda tie my son over in some of that. But so that we have the routine, but not always the schedule.
Yes, yeah, and I think you having that still having structure, which is what you're talking about, is so important because you don't want to go where you kinda don't wanna go either extremes. You don't wanna be so indulgent
Mm,
where you're just giving them
yeah.
whatever they want whenever they want it, because we
Mhm,
know that that leads to poor outcomes. But on the flip side, you don't want to make sure pressure them or restrict them and say, "You need to sit at the table and you need to eat this
mhm.
when the rest of us are eating," because we know how negative restriction and that food pressuring can be for them as well.
Mhm. Well, and even the like, my kids think snack lunch is the coolest thing of all time, which
It
is
sounds cool.
essentially us,
Yeah.
like, cleaning
Mhm.
out the fridge and pantry. Like, what is here? Okay, and then the only rule is we have to choose from different food groups. Like,
Mhm.
we're finding some form of fruit or vegetable, like, whether that's applesauce, whether that's raisins, whether that's grabbing a can of fruit, right? We're doing some form of that and something that's gonna help give you energy, right? Like a protein, something that's gonna help you stay full, and that's just like, okay, whatever is here, it's basically clean out the fridge, but they think it's the coolest.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. It sounds like
Yeah.
a preferred way of eating for me often.
Oh, okay, and then one more trait here is intensity. This one is my actual favorite, I think. People sometimes refer to this trait as enthusiasm, exuberance, vigor, or sometimes even dramatic. I fall into that high intensity category, but it literally has to do with the difference in experience of how the brain fires like an emotional response. Is it like a whoop whoop? I think of like pew pew, or is it like a full explosion, right? Uh
Star Wars noises.
yeah, exactly. And so that difference in our emotional response and emotional experience. I am highly intense, which I even think like the heart monitor. Like I would have big ups and big downs on that heart monitor. My husband is very mild, like low intensity. His is just like steady little like, oh, sometimes there's bumps, but mostly kind of I mean flatlining. That's has a bad connotation. But pretty even keeled. So that is intensity.
Yeah,
And
I
I think this oh, go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna
I'm
say
just so
this is
excited to talk. I'm so intense.
yes, you're tense, but this is an opportunity for me to apologize to my very intense brother who we often, misunderstood growing up, that intensity was just his temperament, and so I'm sorry, Christopher, that we all judged you for waking up being ready to go for the day, firing on all cylinders, so,
Well, there it was.
yep.
And I do feel like intensity, when I think about it with food, is an interesting trait because I think it kind of pairs up alongside things, right? So, like, if a child is low approach, right? To like not super interested in something new, like would have hesitation, and they're highly intense, that can mean it's like a throwdown, like, I'm not trying it, I won't do it, right? Versus if a child is more mild and they have a low approach, I might be like, I don't like, like, I don't want to. Like, no
Mhm.
thanks. Right?
Yeah.
And so that we see intensity kind of come alongside sensitivity. I even think of like persistence. Child is adamant. We didn't really talk about that one, but like persistence being their commitment to a task, that follow through, how much frustration they can tolerate before they give up. And so yeah, highly intense and highly persistent. It's like I will hold my ground. Like we're throwing down
Mhm.
versus if you're mild and low persistence, it's like, okay, well, I mean, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I think especially with this temperament, you're going to find yourself really maybe again overcorrecting in a certain way, right? So
Mm,
if a kid is going to be have that strong distaste and be really expressive for it for a food, you might just be like, "Okay, well, I give up. I'm going to give you whatever food you want," right? So
mm,
turn into that
yes.
indulgent feeding style.
Mhm.
Or if you are a parent who wants to strongly control them, you're going to, pressure them to eat or, do again those restrictive behaviors. So I
Yes.
think being really really aware of your high intensity child and how you are responding to them is really important.
Mhm. And we often warn parents, like, our low intensity children, like, need more attention, like, for us to notice, right? So, like,
Mhm.
if I have one child making a huge right? I mean, fuss about something, right, are low emotional, like, they also might not like it, or they also might be have thoughts, but we might have to, like, draw that out of them a little bit more,
Mhm.
because they can be so mild. Uh, but it is interesting because one thing that you mentioned, like, the authoritarian, right, trying to control, Lori also always mentions that around, like, regularity, like, eat, sleep, and poop. That's always what parents want to
Oh yeah.
control about their child.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, if you have a highly irregular child, your instinct might be to move to that authoritarian, like, no, I will control this. We will do this. It will work this way. And so we want to think about how do we have that balanced, authoritative, um, how can we lean into that? Because we know their temperament is going to impact our style and our strategies, right?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And I think when we talk about intensity or well, any of the temperaments, another thing important to bring back is that idea of division of responsibility.
Mm,
So,
yes.
again, we as the parents get to pick what they eat, where they eat, those kind of things. And the kid gets
Hmm.
to pick if they're going to eat and what they're going to eat of that. So,
Hmm. Yes, and I love the division of responsibility because yeah, having being intense and having two intense children, I'm like, I don't gotta fight about it. Like, and it's
mhm.
actually helpful if I don't. Instead of me trying to force them into this, okay, you can decide not to eat it. This is still what we're having.
Yeah,
Uh,
and what you
mhm.
do is you just use those food parenting practices to try to reinforce the behaviors you want them to participate in, and then they
Yes.
choose if they're going to participate in those behaviors.
Mhm.
So something I would offer as a strategy for this high intensity kiddo
Mhm.
is they might need a little bit more structure, not too much structure, but they might need just a little bit more structure. So they might need
Mm.
more fixed choices. Like here are your two or three options that you get
Yes.
to pick from. So I know you're not going to eat this, so here's a second option, or
Mhm.
they might need some additional support or reinforcement when trying new foods. So this is where you maybe pull out a non-food reward. So we don't ever really want
Mm.
to use food
Mm.
as a reward. We talked about this already.
Yes.
To make your then kind of categorizing as, oh, this food's good, this food's bad. What we want to try
Yes.
instead is using a non-food reward. So like a
Mm.
sticker. So, oh, you tried a new food, here's a sticker for your sticker board,
Mhm.
or hopefully not to put on a wall or a door in your house that will never come off.
Yes. Well, and yeah, I even think of like our positive reinforcement is also kind of a reward. Like that's a
Mhm.
non-food reward of like, I was so proud of you tried this new thing, right? That's a non-food reward of like connection. Um,
Yes.
that's totally one too.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Mm,
And maybe this high intensity kiddo just is looking for that positive reinforcement and that love. Again, I'm sorry,
mhm.
Christopher.
We still love you. I'm so sorry. Oh, all right. Well, we talked about a lot of great strategies throughout the episode based on these specific traits. But one we always have to say when we talk about temperament is this idea of anticipatory guidance. Uh, Essentially, because temperament is a pattern, you can see what's coming, right? If I have a low approach child, I can anticipate they will be a little bit resistant to something unexpected, or they'll be hesitant, I should say, to something unexpected. Versus a high approach child, I can anticipate they will can jump in with both feet pretty quickly. And so we can use that knowledge of that pattern to anticipate, but then choose our strategies accordingly, right? We can guide their behavior because, like, okay, I know they might not be so interested in this. So I'm going to make sure that I do offer a familiar food as a side with this new main dish we've never had before. But we can anticipate and accommodate accordingly with our parenting.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. And
Mhm.
ditto, just everything we've
Yeah.
said today.
Yeah. Well, I'm like, basically, all of the strategies you gave today were anticipatory guidance around
Yes, they were.
temperament and food.
Mhm.
Awesome. Well, this brings us to our stop, breathe, talk section. We're going to bring in our producer, Mackenzie DeYoung. She's going to ask us an off the cuff question about temperament and food and kids. Let's hear it.
All right. So, when we talk about temperament and what I've heard, so maybe I'm just choosing to hear it this way, but I'm hearing a lot of recommendations for our younger kids.
Mm,
So I'm hearing a lot of like, and again, maybe I'm choosing to hear it this way, but like things that we might think of like with our younger kids and trying foods
yeah.
and all of this. I would love, and I know we will have an episode on school agers and food, teens and food, but I'd love to focus on teens, preteens, older school agers and food and temperament, especially. And this might be a personal takeaway. Um, like around sensitivity and withdrawing kids that
Mm,
you use the word picky eaters with both of those, which we also will talk about. But
mhm.
around temperament, how do you have any like tips specific for kids or parents of kids who are coming into this like, oh, I'm too late. Like,
Mm.
I didn't do any of this for my kids when they were little. They're preteens and teens now, and their temperament is what it is. Do you have any tips, tricks, advice around that? Or again, especially like sensitivity withdrawing.
I love that question because you're right. So many of our examples were like young kids. Uh,
Yes, I think
That's okay.
as 2 parents of young children, that is
Mhm.
always where my mind goes.
yeah, yes. Well, I'll say one thing that comes to mind is their temperament, like temperament holds out, right? Temperament stays the
Mhm.
same. So whether you learned about temperament when your child was 1, whether you learned about temperament when your child is like 18, um, the opportunity to learn their temperament again, like a little better. And chances are, as soon as you hear these traits for so many of our kids, we're so familiar, like we're experts on our kids. So you're like, oh, that's that. Okay. Yep. That's that. That tracks for so and so, and so
Oh,
that temperament holds
definitely.
out, so you're not too late. Like, the temperament's still there. Um, and I think one of the cool things about, I mean, it can be hard, but I think if we kinda lean into that repair. When our kids are older, they have that, like, cognitive ability to have those conversations around, "You know what? For a long time, I have always said, 'You have to try at least 1 bite.' Or for a long time, I've always
Mhm.
said, finish your plate," or whatever it might be that maybe you're learning now isn't like, okay, that's actually really not so helpful. The great thing about having older kids is you can talk through that with them, and you can acknowledge and say, okay, from here on I want to do this differently, and I'm sorry, that I was doing this in the past. Like,
Sure.
let's do this together. So I think that's one thing that's beautiful about learning it when our kids are older. What would you say, Lindy?
Yeah, I know. I think all the practices hold, but maybe being able to then provide an explanation for why you're doing these practices is also a benefit to
Mm,
it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's that kind of
yes.
like, "Oh, you
Agree.
understand that these things I maybe shouldn't have restricted you from doing that because now you might be more you might lean the other way and then overeat that or something like that." So, I totally
Hmm.
understand why you are you're doing these behaviors are part of who you are because I reinforce them. So let's talk about how we can work together to do some of these different things, these other strategies that might
Hmm.
teach you to not help you to
Yes.
behave a different way.
Yeah. And the other thing we talk about in our temperament workshop, which, like, hey, oh, you can take that. Um,
Sure
but
thing.
in our temperament workshop, we talk about like reframing words. And so we use the term picky eaters because that's what people say, right? Is picky eaters. But we can reframe that to say like selective eaters, right? Or intentional eaters, or in tune with their bodies, right? And so there's different ways we can frame things up as you think about sensitivity and withdrawing. We can frame that up in a different way that's more positive for our kids to the light we want them to see themselves in. Um,
Um, so
yeah.
this is just a kind of an aha, but like even like picky eaters versus like I'm just a sensitive eater. Like I just can
Yes.
acknowledge like I can't handle spice. Things are
Hmm.
too that's too sticky. That's too slimy. Like
Yeah.
and like acknowledging that, but at the same time being able to be open even though I'm withdrawing to like giving it another shot.
And I
Yeah.
also think
You
we
know?
have the chance to teach when we recognize a trait. Like, yeah, it comes with assets and liabilities. So, yeah, people might, a liability or a con or a challenge might be, I'm not so interested in trying that, or I'm extra sensitive and that sounds yucky to me, right?
Mhm.
That can be a liability. But an asset can be, the literature tells us you might be less likely to overeat, right? To like overdo it because you are selective. Right. And so it's like also finding the good within your temperament trait of like, hey, I've got some assets here to work with, even if it generally has a negative connotation.
And then I'm like, yeah, but if there's bread available, then
See?
the old bar.
Fair game.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I felt like, okay, but what about? So I think we
Mm,
kind of touched on some of that. So thank you. I
all
mean,
right.
feel free to add any other thoughts if there are any, but I think we're getting there. And then
She's
I
caught up. Mackenzie has an aha.
I think,
yeah.
Mackenzie, we just need to do like a one-on-one, just the two of us just talking about your food and, your
No,
yeah.
No.
that might be true, Lindy. You and we might have to have a consultation on this.
Oh
Don't
my
worry,
god.
it'll be a good thing. See, don't be afraid of it.
Yes.
It'll be a good thing.
Non-judgmental observation, Kens.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, we'll work on it. We'll take that off podcast, so, I think we might have to have that conversation.
I don't know. People might be interested in hearing that
Yeah, they're like, I would
conversation.
like to explore
True.
that.
If you're interested, let us know. Maybe we can do a bonus podcast where Lindy just breaks down all of Kenzie DeYoung's weird.
Oh, I love it. I
All
love it.
right, well, thank
Awesome.
you.
Well, thanks, Kent. I was like, and she's giving us a great segue because as we move into our next few episodes, we do have some that are kind of broken down by the age of kids. So we'll get into what it's like to like infants, what kids, teens, etc. And yes, we do have a whole episode coming on selective or picky eating. So more to come. She's really segueing us, promoting these next coming episodes this season. But for today, we really kind of dug in. We know that temperament is always there. Temperament is an underlying factor that influences our parenting, which practices we choose, right? That's related to food and not to food. Um, but we see how it plays out when it comes to food and our kids, what they eat, how much they eat, and that we have the opportunity to kind of understand that pattern, and that there's all kinds of strategies for us to tap into that Lindy was sharing with us today to offer that kind of guidance to encourage our kids to be healthy and independent eaters.
Yes, yes. So next week, we are going to delve into starting out looking at those different ages and stages of how we feed our kids. So next week, we're actually going to look at feeding and the first 1,000 days.
Can't wait. All and I feel like that's where so many people have questions, right? When our kids are so little, we're like this and that, and so much changes so fast and how
Mm.
they eat. And we're excited to dig into it. So, thank you for joining us today on the Science of Parenting podcast. Remember, you can subscribe to our weekly audio podcast on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. And don't miss the rest of the episodes that are coming this season.
So come along with us as we tackle the ups and downs, the ins and outs, and the research and reality all around the science of parenting.
The Science of Parenting is hosted by Mackenzie Johnson, produced by Mackenzie DeYoung, with research and writing by Barbara Dunn Swanson. Send in questions and comments to parenting@iastate.edu and connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. This institution is an equal opportunity provider. For the full non-discrimination statement or accommodation inquiries, go to www.extension.iastate.edu/diversity/ext.